just to recap, the topic will be on the impeccability of Christ. And the topic reads, while Christ trod the earth as a human, he must have had the ability and the potential to sin. To adopt the cannot sin model over the cannot sin model is to compromise the efficacy of his high priestly office. Okay, and the counter statement is short and as such. Christ had no ability and potential to sin while he was on earth, because he was fully God, and it is against the nature of God to sin. This in no way compromises the efficacy of his high priestly office. Okay, is this ready?
Is that their belief?
The one that I just read out, yes, it is different from the one that's on the board.
That means they believe in the impeccability.
Yes, that's what they put in their statement. Okay, you can take away anytime you want.
Well,
remember to talk into the mics, please.
Okay, our statement has already been read. Before we go into this, we're going to define a few terms in the question. First, very simply, what is sin? Okay, 1 John 3:4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law. So that's the simple definition of sin. Okay. Then also, sin is not just an act, because it can be in the mind as well. Supporting verse Matthew 5:28, the one that says that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery in his heart. Okay. And then also, if you want one from the 10 Commandments, it's Exodus 20:17, where covetousness is a sin. Okay. Now, cannot sin, as stated in the question, means no ability to sin at all. The alternative term that people use to talk about this is the impeccability of Christ, which means he had no ability to sin. The can space not sin means that Christ had the ability to sin, but he chose not to. Okay, so that's the difference between the two of them. Now, compromise the efficacy of his high priestly office. This basically means that it makes his office less effective. And what is his high priestly office? Reference verse Hebrews 4:15-16, but specifically the second part of it. Hang on. Yes. For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Okay, so the question is basically saying that if he could not sin, if he didn't have the ability to sin, then he cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. So that compromises his ability to be our high priest.
Is that not true?
No.
Why is it not true?
Okay, we will establish our key points first, and then we continue with your questions. Why is it not true, is it? Why? Okay, first key point to establish is that Jesus is God. We were hoping the previous group would establish this, but supporting verse, very simply, John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, and then so this shows that Christ himself was God, and then this did not change when he came to earth, as stated by Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now, then it goes on to God cannot sin. So this by extension means that Jesus also cannot sin. Supporting scripture, James 1:13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Okay? Then next.
So are you saying that when Jesus Christ was on earth, he had a split personality? Is that what you are saying?
Not split personality.
Then sometimes you say that because only God will not be tempted. But Jesus Christ, when he was on earth, he was both God and man. So those verses simply just don't apply. Those verses that you have cited describe Jesus Christ as only God, not when he was God and man at the same time. When you say that when Jesus is tempted, his Godhead surfaced, and so therefore I am not tempted. So when Satan tempted him after 40 days and 40 nights, you are saying that Jesus Christ used his divinity to cheat. That is a very serious error, isn't it?
Our understanding of temptation is that it's different from lust. Okay?
We didn't say he lusted. I mean, nobody said he lusted. We used the word temptation as well. You are saying that whenever he was tempted on earth, his deity will arise, and then he just subdue his humanity. Because you cited only verses that argues that God will not be tempted, God cannot be tempted. So you're saying that Jesus Christ cheated when he was on earth. Whenever he faced temptation, it was no temptation because he used his power as God to ward off all temptation. I'm not tempted. So where is the temptation? How can he be our high priest?
So let's speak to the mic now.
Okay, another question that we will address After very quickly going through our way, we need to establish main points first. Okay? Okay, Jesus was tempted. Okay,
How can he be tempted?
wait, the Bible doesn't contradict itself, so there are passages which says that Christ was tempted. Hebrews 4:15. We have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin.
So that argues for his peccability, because temptation has to be real. How can temptation be real when he has no potential to be tempted?
Which brings us to our next point. Right?
Can you be tempted? Can a person be tempted in the glorified state?
If you were put in a situation of temptation, no. Okay.
If you are in the glorified state, which one best describe you? Cannot sin or cannot sin? In the glorified state.
Cannot, no ability.
So no ability. So you are saying that Jesus Christ was already in the state of
No. He
the
was not in the
glorified
glorified
state.
state.
That's why if it's not in the glorified state, so therefore you cannot use, he cannot sin.
Okay, if we go back to James 1:13, right? The verse says, "Let no man say when he's tempted, I am tempted of God." Oh wait, James 14. James 1, verse 14. Okay, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. The key point here is of his own lust. So there's a difference between temptations when we are tempted and when God is tempted, okay?
No, this verse 14 describes someone who has already succumbed to temptation.
The process...
Because you said that temptation is not a sin. So therefore, you can't even compare our temptation with Christ's temptation. You cannot use this as the basis to reject the peccability of Christ. Now you have to answer the question. If you said that the glorified state is the state whereby we will be in the cannot sin state, and if Christ is already in the cannot sin state before his glorification, then what is the difference?
The difference is that God was not just God, and he is also not just man. As the previous group mentioned, he is the anthropos. So, if you are talking just from the divine nature point of view, his divine nature cannot sin. But his human nature...
Can you use the split personality of Christ to describe the peccability and the impeccability of Christ?
Split personality?
You sometimes, when he's tempted, his Godhead surface. Right? So when he is thirsty, his humanity surface. You cannot describe Christ like that. You seem to split him into two persons. So he walks around like two persons. So he played cheat. Whenever he's tempted, oh, his deity surface. So there is no issue whenever I preach from the temptation of Christ after 40 days and 40 nights. I will preach it from that perspective. It's no problem for him because he can never be tempted. There's no struggle. So even though he may have fasted 400 days and 400 nights, it will still be no problem because he is beyond temptation. So how can the temptation be real?
The thing is, there's no one point in time where nature takes dominance. That's not what...
Well, he seems to argue that way. When he's tempted, his deity surface because he's God who can never be tempted. And then when he's thirsty and hungry, oh, then his humanity surface. Can God be hungry and thirsty?
Yes, he can.
Then you see, there you go. But then how come Jesus is hungry and thirsty? So now his humanity surface. You see, now you speak of him as if he has two personalities.
But even while he is hungry and thirsty, that doesn't mean that he's not God.
So you said God can never be hungry and thirsty, right?
No, I didn't.
Hey, I thought I asked you, can God be hungry and thirsty?
I said yes.
Oh, God can be hungry and thirsty.
Yeah.
So God in heaven is hungry and thirsty.
When he was on earth.
Oh, so God in heaven is not hungry and thirsty. You see, that's what I'm saying. You see, now you split him, you see. So
now,
you say
now,
that
now he has the glorified body.
Can God be hungry and thirsty in heaven?
Okay. In heaven, no.
So in heaven he's not hungry and thirsty.
While he was on earth,
he's hungry and thirsty. So when he was on earth, in the glorified body, can he be hungry and thirsty?
While he was on earth in the glorified body, no.
No. So it is not whether on earth or in heaven. It's the body. Therefore, it's the body, right?
Yeah.
So when Jesus Christ was on earth, he's fully God, right? So as fully God, is he hungry and thirsty?
While he was on earth, he was fully God. Before he received the glorified body, he was fully God and also fully man.
He can be hungry and thirsty.
So he could be hungry and thirsty before he received the glorified body.
So therefore, why can't he be tempted too?
He was tempted because
he was tempted. So therefore, he can be tempted.
Our understanding of temptation is not. How do I explain this?
Let me read a paragraph from the this book, many a time when we are tempted, we have already...
What book is that? Is that a Bible?
Okay, never mind.
If it's not a Bible, we
Okay.
cannot use that.
John 14:30.
John 14,
30.
30.
Jesus said that,
John 14, 30.
yes, the prince of this world come up and had nothing in me.
I will not talk much with you. Is it?
14:30.
Yes, 14:30.
So then,
What is that got to do with the peccability and impeccability of Christ? If Christ cannot be tempted and feel with us, how can he be our high priest? The Bible makes no sense. The fact that he can be tempted and he did not sin makes him the high priest. If he cannot be tempted, he can't feel with us, because the qualification of a high priest is that he must be able to feel with us. That is the key element of being a high priest.
When
How do
you
you
say
define
that,
a high priest?
when
How
you
do you
say-
define a priesthood?
Okay, when you say that he must be able to feel with us, does this mean that he needs to have felt exactly the same thing we feel when we are tempted?
That's
So,
correct. The
let's
same
say-
struggle with temptation, just like us. But he did not sin. Now remember, temptation is not sin. When we are tempted, as long as we don't succumb, it's not sin.
So let's say while Christ was on earth and a pretty woman walked by. Okay, it's a bit dangerous to do that, but okay, in our case, if that
No,
happened,
continue with your question. Go on. Don't stop.
wait, okay, we
Go on.
start with humans first, okay?
A human first,
In-
okay.
In
Let's
our
say,
situation, if a pretty woman walked by and a guy looked on, and then he felt that lust, is that temptation or is that sin?
that of course is really sin.
That's already sin.
That's correct.
Okay, but then that's the feeling that we're talking about here, you see.
Oh, that's not the definition of temptation, my friend. You have a wrong definition of temptation. You make temptation equal sin.
Yeah,
Temptation is not lust.
So the thing is,
That is a new definition of
the thing is
temptation.
the feeling of lust.
No, temptation is not the feeling of lust.
Like
Temptation
we
is
will have
really
the feeling
tempted.
of lust. So does Christ have to go through that feeling of
You
lust to be able to
cannot use
understand us?
our feeling and equate that with Christ's feeling of temptation. And because when you say that you feel tempted, you equate it with lust, and you cannot use your feeling to determine a doctrine. A doctrine must stand on its own, not based upon your feeling.
Exactly that. There's a separation between temptation and the lust. So when Christ is put through the temptation, he does not feel the lust, because to even feel the lust means he has sinned already.
That's correct.
So in that same sense, it means he doesn't have to go through the feeling per se
Of what?
of what we go through.
Who says you have to go through? He has to go through what you feel for you
He
to
goes through the
determine a
temptation.
doctrine.
He goes through the temptation.
He goes through the
And
temptation. That's
temptation is
correct.
defined as the circumstance.
But he can't go through the temptation if he can never sin. There is no temptation. Temptation cannot be real if he has no potential to sin. Just like you yourself admitted, right? In the glorified state, you will never be tempted. Is that not true? Because you cannot sin. You mean you can be tempted in the glorified state? Can you be tempted in the glorified state?
You can be tempted, but you just won't sin.
Or you can be tempted in the glorified state?
Wait, hang on.
You just said that Christ cannot be tempted in the glorified state. And you said that our glorified state is the same, right?
Christ won't feel hungry and thirsty in the glorified state.
Right? Correct, right? So can he be tempted in the glorified state? Can we be tempted in the glorified state?
If we are tempted, we won't sin.
Can we be tempted in the glorified state? Can a person who does not have the potential to sin be tempted? So you are saying that we will forever be tempted even in eternity in the glorified state. Is that what you are saying? There can be no temptation if I have no potential to
If you're
sin.
in the fixed state, you cannot be tempted. So once we are glorified, then
Or you mean Christ was not in the fixed state when he was before his glorification? You just said that Christ was the same yesterday, today, and forever.